So I don't know about you, but I'm sure that you have, like me, contemplated your relationship with God. If I were to ask you, maybe some of you would even tell me you experienced the divine. Maybe it was when you were hiking in the Grand Canyon, or maybe it was when you decided to go and, in my case, go skydiving for the very first time. It was so phenomenal. Or maybe it was right after you gave birth to a baby or something. There was that moment in life when you experienced the divine, whatever it was. And I'm often find that in talking to people, they're very apt to tell me when it was. Maybe they were hiking and they saw a rainbow. It's phenomenal what it is to experience the divine. It's those moments, those precious little specific moments where we can feel God's very presence and know that we're part of something even greater than ourselves. Last week, God told Abraham to build a sanctuary so that God will dwell among them. And I just want to remind us that in the history of Judaism thus far, how did we experience God? Well, Abraham heard God say to him, Lech lecha mi'artzecha mimoladecha mibeit avicha, go forth from the land of your father into a promised land that I'm going to show you. We saw that Jacob prayed to God and saw God on top of a ladder. We know that there have been divine moments and encounters, specifically Moses and the burning bush. In no case was God specifically going to be put into a sanctuary or a building of any sort. And yet, here we have God, him or herself, identifying that he or she will place themselves willfully into a building. And I've always struggled. What does that mean? Why would God want to put him or herself into a building? Or in the case of the Israelites going through the wilderness, into Ohel HaMoed, the tent of meetings, and really ultimately into, if you recall the story of the Raiders of the Lost Ark or that movie, into that some sort of an ark where God was supposed to dwell. Well, what does it really mean? So I came up with a few different suggestions and ideas in the hopes that even my own questioning and pondering will trigger some of your thoughts and our ideas collectively together. So there's always been a tradition in Judaism, the mystical tradition, that teaches us that, well, Moses was told directly to instruct Bezalel to construct the tabernacle, to construct the tent of meetings, and that as part of that, every single person had a specific job in terms of a community, and we are supposed to do our part, clean up the world as it were, and God, in defying all human logic, would engage in tzimtzum, contract, and put him or herself into that tent of meetings. And there's nothing that we could do that would explain it. It just is beyond our capacity to understand. Another concept I've come up with is the idea of being in relationship to God, that God needs us as we need God. We are in a partnership with God, that this is a loving partnership. And we all know what it means to be in a partnership or in a family. It does not mean sitting at home alone, eating a microwave dinner in front of our TVs, as so many of us are now apt to do. Rather, it means that we are present with one another, that we don't leave the iPhone on the table just in case we get a notification, but we remove the iPhone and put it away so that we can actually be there. The fact that God chose to be there with us is exactly how we need to choose to be there with other people. And so, food for thought, pun intended, how do we eat and how are we present for one another? The third thought I had, and this was a little bit more, well, shall we say, a slightly more morose thought, was thinking that the Ohel Moed temporary. The first temple was ultimately destroyed and ultimately temporary. The second temple, temporary. And we can look through the archaeologic record at many other synagogues and sacred structures that at one point held a lot of emphasis and import for the Jewish people, but over time that understanding diminished. And as time evolved, our relationship with those structures changed. I think that's perhaps even more poignant today when we see that our seminaries are shifting, that the URJ itself is going through organizational shifts, and Jewish institutions as a whole are shifting. What does it mean to be Jewish? How does this play out in terms of our buildings? Where and how are we going to interact with one another? And I think the fact that there's that the structure itself is temporary reminds us that our relationship with God is eternal, but the structure itself and where that relationship might take place may come and go over time. The third, and I think for me, one of the most poignant thoughts I had, fourth, I realized, one of the most poignant thoughts I had on this subject was that ultimately this defines our relationship with ourselves. This, of course, meaning that we are not just created B'Tselem Elohim in the divine image, but pressing that to yet another logical conclusion that within us is God. Within all of you is God. And that we ourselves are our own best judges of God and of ourselves. We ourselves choose through our actions and deeds to create heaven or hell on earth, increase or decrease suffering, bring joy by visiting somebody who is sick and providing for them nourishment when they most need it, that we ourselves through our own deeds are able to bring God into this world, just as we ourselves through our own deeds and thoughts diminish God's presence in this world. And I think for me, that's ultimately one of the most exciting parts of the idea of having Ohel Moed and a tabernacle and all of it, that ultimately it defines, and perhaps more than anything, is a symbol of the relationship that we have with God outside of us, and also the relationship that we have with our internal and understanding of God. If we view ourselves in a positive light, we'll bring God out. Other things will happen in a positive light. If we view ourselves in a negative light, that will come out too. And I think it also comes out not just in our relationship with each other, but in how we respond and respect sacred places within our society. Do we take care of the building? Do we take care of the community? Do we honor each other as a sacred community? All of which I think are symbolic of our true relationship with God. So as God is dwelling among us, as that is stated within the text, I hope and pray that these 4 ideas or concepts bring some element of uplift to you and nourishment, and may one of them, or yet a 5th and 6th and yet unknown concept, help illuminate further and enhance, enrich, and deepen all of our relationship with the divine.